So as a consequence, if you're worshiping a five-headed god of lust, you can expect a lot of sexual stuff to come out of that in the doctrine, right? And that's what begins to appear in the Talmud. So Hillel the Elder and Shammai, they taught the idea that the Talmud was dead. The Torah was dead and the Talmud was living. The Talmud was controlling. The Torah was gone, the Talmud's controlling. And then John Hyrcanus converts everybody into this, mostly Edomites, into this religion, point of the sword, forced circumcision. Now, there were some Levites and there were some of the house of Yehudah still present in the land, but they were very few and far between. I mean, they represented maybe 5% of the population in this kingdom of Idumea. And so this brings up the religion of Judaism. Now, this religion, when Mashiach sees this religion, he knows this is happening. These guys have now reconstructed a temple. They're claiming the name is there. They're trying to practice the doctrines that were set forth in the kingdom of Yahud under David. And so Mashiach comes to them to square them away. Okay, guys, look, you got this wrong, right? Your Talmud is wrong here. Your Talmud is wrong there. You're really a den of vipers. You've heaped up a bunch of burdens on men's shoulders that don't belong there. My yoke is easy. My burden is light. Why aren't you following that? And then to prove that I have authority, he spoke with authority. What's it say? Very first off, when he spoke in the synagogue, he spoke with authority, and they were all mind-boggling. It's like, you don't speak like the scribes. You speak like with authority, because he had the authority. And then he shows the authority through the miracles and through the healings and through the raising of the dead. All of these things, he's proving his authority. And he's trying to clarify to them, if you're going to pull these scriptures out, you need to find the truth of it. It's this way and not that way. It's lawful to do good on the Shabbat. It's lawful to heal on the Shabbat. It's lawful to eat the showbread on Shabbat. Because the Shabbat was created for man, not man for the Shabbat. But nonetheless, his practice was the Shabbat. Nonetheless, his practice was the feast. I mean, there'd be no Last Supper if he wasn't practicing the Pesach.
Right.
There would be no foundation of the whole of the community of the faith if there hadn't been the Ruach coming to them on Shavuot.
Right.
These feasts are for us.
Yeah.
They're not for the religion of Judaism. They're for us.
That's right.
And so at any rate, so this is what you see. So now when you talk about the three elements of who is Yehudah, you can be it racially, you could be it citizenship-wise, but you can't because the kingdom was destroyed in 586 BC and never recreated. So you're either that genetically or you're what they call in the modern Jews, a practitioner of the religion. So the practitioner of the religion is really the defining point. Now, was there a racial-centered group that was practicing this religion? Yeah, there was. And these, believe it or not, these people sprung out of they have now been identified through DNA as Greco-Roman, not Turkish, but Greco-Roman. Well, when you come to, and you can see this in the Jewish Encyclopedia says that the Ashkenazi are children of Esau.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you look at what happened, and Jasher gives us this story. Jasher sucks. Nobody should ever read Jasher. We hate Jasher. It's not a bona fide document. It's blah, 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 blah. But Jasher is the only one that gives us the story and says, Zepho. Who's Zepho? He was the grandson of Esau, taken captive and taken back into not the Mitzrayim, but the Cushite Empire. He's taken into the Cushite. Well, he's taken into Mitzrayim as a prisoner. He escapes and gets into the Cushite Empire, and he spends all his time in the Cushite Empire trying to talk them into making war on the guys who took him captive. Let's go up there and bust their heads, right? And they're like, we want to do that, but their army's a lot bigger than ours. We're not going. So what does he do? He goes to Italy. He goes to Italy, and he makes all these promises and becomes the king of the Kittim. He becomes the king of the Kittim at the same time that Zerach and Peretz are forming Rome. Zepho is becoming the king of the Kittim. Now, as he becomes the king, and by the way, you might say, it's not possible that Peretz and Zerach were these Romulus and Remus. Then you explain to me the Etruscan alphabet, which is Paleo-Hebrew, right? Mm-hmm. It's Paleo-Hebrew, as is the Colburn alphabet, Paleo-Hebrew. Explain to me those two alphabets. What are they doing there if Zerach and Peretz were not the founders, right? And so here you see a child of Esau, a grandson of Esau, the first king of Rome, And the kingdom of Idumea would understand that they were going to make war with the Kittim until they recognized that their king was an Edomite. We don't need to do that. And what's the next thing you see? You see this unity between the Romans and the Edomites. So when Antiochus Epiphanes comes in, and he comes out, I've had it with these guys, man, these Maccabees that are going to do this rebellion and establish this new chosen people kingdom. I've had it with this stuff. I'm going to stomp them. And he goes down to Egypt, and who is it meets him? A Roman meets him. And he draws a line in the sand. He says, if you're going to take on these Edomites, here's the line right here. If you cross that line, then we know that's what you're going to do. And the implication is then Rome's going to come at war with you. That's where draw a line in the sand initially stems from. That story with Antiochus Epiphanes. So Antiochus flees, he leaves, and he goes back, and he ultimately dies from syphilis, and he loses the kingdom. He loses the Maccabean kingdom, the Hasmonean kingdom, right? Well, this is actually an Edomite kingdom that becomes controlled by Edomites under Herod. So when you get to the Herodian kingdom, that's an Edomite kingdom. It's Idumea all over again, okay? And so this house of Esau is now controlling Rome. It's controlling its leaders. And the Caesars, who would declare themselves Pontiff Maximus, were children of Esau. Esau. Okay, Esau. Now, this is going to become much more difficult when we get farther into this. But this group of people were the ones who eventually migrated into Central Europe and then eventually migrated into this area of Khazar, because this area of Khazar is one of the most fertile places on earth. I mean, particularly when you're talking about like the Khazarian Empire occupied all the way to the Caspian Sea. That means, what is now modern Krasnodar and Cherkessia and all of this. This is, we used to do mission work with what was called the Black Soil Project, because it is so fertile over in that area. It's unbelievable. And so they had occupied this area all the way to what we now call Odessa, and all the way back to what we now call, the capital city was Atil, and that is now the province of Dagestan in southern Russia. And the capital city there is now called Astrakhan, which used to be called Atil, from Attila the Hun, he came out of there, Atil. Yeah, so that's now, they changed it to Astrakhan when Genghis Khan captured the whole area. Okay, so the Russians would pull that area away from the Mongols. They defeated the Mongols, right? That's the first step. But that became when Russia became, imperious to defeat on the battlefield when they defeated the Mongols, right? Yeah. And so you have this idea that they were in this fertile area. Well, the problem was these guys were notorious because they were identity thieves, they were pirates, and by deception, they waged war. So they would take on the names of somebody and take on their identity and then claim to be royalty or nobility, whatever. They were engaged in identity theft right from the get-go. Well, the Kievan Rus would get ticked off at them. The Kievan Rus finally said, look, you guys, we're not going to do this anymore. We're an Orthodox people, and you need to settle down on what you're going to do. So they declared Judaism to be their religion.
Right.
Now, when they did, when this was around the 8th century, they declared Judaism to be religion. Why? Because it was that same idea of the Maccabean approach, right? Edomites that had gone into this religion of Judaism. It went around 165, 150 BC. That would be transferred into Rome. That's why the popes wear kippas, right? And then that would ultimately be transferred into Khazaria. And in the Khazaria, they would bring in this Babylonian Talmud. And so the Talmud is going to continue to be increased with even more wickedness. It's going to be increased with even more wickedness. The writing of Maimonides includes its own share of wickedness. And then of course, you would see guys like Sabati Tzvi and the Kabbalists that would begin to arise in the 1400s after the expulsion from Spain. In particular, they began to rise in Safed and in Istanbul or Constantinople. And all of this language would get transferred into the Talmud. And so then when you get to the 1200s, Shem Tov, they began to develop rabbinical Judaism. Okay. Now, under rabbinical Judaism, it is not a question of believing in Yah. It is not a question of believing in the Torah. It is obeying the rabbi. You might remember Fiddler on the Roof when Rev Tevye says, well, it's written in the good book. Well, what does the rabbi have to say about it? Well, the good book says, and he didn't know what the good book said, right?
No.
There must be something in the good book about the chicken, right? Right? He didn't know what was said in the good book, and he relied on the rabbi to tell him what was in the good book. And the rabbi would spend all his time penciling what? The Talmud, right? So the rabbis were teaching them, you can divorce your wife if she burns the toast. This is the kind of stuff that they're finding in the Talmud, right? And there's even a reference to that in Fiddler on the Roof. And what does Rev Tevye say? We do these things because they're tradition, right? And so it's all about the tradition, and it's about the rabbinical authority governing the tradition. It is not about the worship of Yah. Has nothing to do with that.
Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, right?
Bingo. I mean, that's it. So you can see, for instance, many modern Jews, self-professed atheists, and their children being taught atheism, will nonetheless go to Jerusalem for a bar mitzvah in front of the kotel. Because it's the tradition.
It is.
Yeah. So traditional rabbinicalism would then become the dominant theme of Judaism. So rabbinicalism and Judaism, Talmudism, they're pretty much hand in hand. Until you began to see some very radical rabbis start to rise in the 19th century, like Victor Mordecai, who changed his name to Karl Marx, for instance. Radical rabbi. There were other radical rabbis, a guy named Rus, who would be the founder of Zionism, that would be picked up by Theodor Herzl. And then you would see guys coming out of rabbinical leadership that would enter into radical political groups called the Bolsheviks. Right. And so Bolshevism was strictly a Talmudic enterprise run by radical atheist Talmudists. So you have to understand, there's a great film that's available. You can't get it on YouTube, but I think it's available on BitChute maybe, or Rumble. But it's called Europa, and it's all in capital letters, Europa. And it gives the history of the Bolshevik Revolution and how brutal was that genocide in Russia. And if you really want to understand the Russian people, until you understand the difficulty of that Bolshevik genocide in Russia, you don't understand them at all. You do not understand Russians. And for the Russians to come back to being an Orthodox nation like they are today is absolutely remarkable. This is in the hands of Yah, and in the hands of Yah only. It's absolutely remarkable that this would take place. So again, what we do see is that those who call themselves Jews today have no linkage whatsoever to the house of Yehuda. Rather, they're Greco-Roman in their racial origin, not Turkish, Greco-Roman. They're Greco-Roman, and they became Jews as a consequence of the practice of the religion beginning in the 8th century. And and the difficulty with the Talmud is that if you believe the Talmud becomes a curse. And it's like once you have a Mason in your family, it's very difficult to break, particularly a 33rd level Mason, very difficult to break free from that curse, because the Mason eats the soul of the next 4 generations in front of him. All the blessings that would come to his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, he takes unto himself as a Mason.
Yeah.
And Talmudism has its own curse as well. And so the curse of Talmudism is once you have somebody begin to believe it and to practice it, it brings a curse upon your family that remains for generations. It's a more difficult curse than the Masonic order. It's a more difficult curse. Okay. So because of this now, the Talmud would be practiced by the Sephardim in Spain as well. And they suffered as a result, but they didn't suffer as badly as the Ashkenazim did. But the Sephardim would be expelled from Spain, because what the scriptures say, if you do these things, I will vomit you out of the land that I have given you. And they were vomited out of the land. And that's what happened. And they've been repeatedly vomited out of the land where they have gone. They don't see any correlation between their practice and the fact that they get repeatedly vomited out of the land. They're being vomited out of the land right now in the Middle East.
Yeah.
And this is something that is certain to happen. Now, for those people that do not understand it, so again, when we talk about Yehuda, Now, I'm leaving out a portion of this too, and I don't want to leave out this portion of it because there are many of the tribes of Yasharel that are also present in Africa.
Right.
There is a black tribe of Yahuda in Kenya. There is a black tribe of Levi in Kenya. There is a black tribe of Levi in Zimbabwe and down into South Africa. The House of Dan is present in Nigeria and in that area. There's Yahudim in Ghana and in those areas. And so we cannot leave out the black Africans. Now, also, all of the House of Israel, all 12 tribes were present in Libya.
Right.
What was called the Carthaginian Empire. That was actually the northern tribes of Israel had populated that area before the Assyrian captivity of 722 BC. So you can, and probably Moroccans were also probably of the house, same thing. So you cannot kick back and say, oh, gee, we know who the House of Yehuda is. You really don't.
We don't.
And we believe, for instance, that the House of Dan is present in Japan. The House of Naphtali is present in China and in Southeast Asia and in the Polynesians. The House of Manasseh is present in American Indians. I mean, it goes, and the tribes of Yehuda is also present in the American Indian tribes in the St. Lawrence Waterway. The Iroquois speak a form of Hebrew. Okay, right. So I mean, this is some,
It's amazing. I work with Dr. Monzo a lot, who wrote the Aleph Tav Body System, which we've got to get you that book, Dr. Pidgeon. You got to get a copy of this. It's really interesting because what he did is this came to him from studying jujitsu and seeing in ancient Japan where there was a healing system where the Paleo Hebrew alphabet was mapped to different points on the physical body that is a deep energy system that when you lay on hands, you can move energy in the body to help heal the body.
Yeah, what's that system where they poke you with the needles?
That's acupuncture, but it doesn't, right. But that's kind of a more surface system. This is just the laying on of hands that is a very deep system because it even affects the soul and the emotions that have been trapped into the body. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah. It is interesting. And I won't say anything more about that, but I will see if I can find that book. But yeah, Chelle.
We'll make sure that you get one of those books, Dr. Pidgeon.
Okay. Sounds good. So anyway, Chelle, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying that, when you look at these tribes now, so if you understand that of the current kingdom of Israel, the current nation of Israel is, again, it's identity theft. Mm-hmm. That, as some people have said, they have no genetic tie whatsoever to the Middle Eastern people. They've got no genetic tie to them at all. And this has been proven. I mean, peer-reviewed papers have proven this.
He is not going to establish it.
Yeah. And so because of this, the real land that they're in is the kingdom of Idumea. They have recaptured Idumea, not Iudea. Wow. Okay, they've recaptured Idumea, not Iudea. Now, because of this, even though they mislabeled it as Israel, and it really wasn't them who mislabeled it, it was their agents at the UN that mislabeled it in the UN resolution S-181 that called it Israel. Well, it was never called Israel, not even under David and Solomon was it called Israel. David ruled the kingdom of Yahud, and it became the unified kingdom of Yahud under David and Solomon. Only when it broke apart, the northern kingdom became known as Yitzrael. Not Israel, but Yitzrael. And the southern kingdom was called Iudea. So what are you talking about? Israel, right? This is all hodgepodge, people who didn't read their scriptures, who have got pop culture going on, everything they know, they came from their Sunday school teacher who wasn't educated at all. And, so this is what they do. So